Before Las Vegas became the entertainment capital of the world, someone had to recognize what entertainment could become. In the early 1960s, when hotel after hotel passed on 4 young musicians from Liverpool, one man said yes. Not in a showroom, not in a lounge, in the convention center. That man was Stan Irwin, and this is his story. The interview that forms the foundation of this documentary was conducted by Cork Proctor for the University of Nevada, Las Vegas Oral History Research Center. It is part of the All That Jazz Project, a remarkable archive of first-person testimony from the men and women who built Las Vegas entertainment from the ground up. Stan Irwin sat down with Proctor and talked for hours. What follows draws from that conversation. A first-person account of a half-century of American entertainment history, told by someone who was not a bystander. And from the broader story of a city that reinvented American entertainment, one room at a time. It was 1964. The Beatles were the biggest act on earth. Every major hotel on the Strip had already turned them down. The numbers seemed impossible, the logistics overwhelming, the risk too great. Stan Irwin, Vice President of Entertainment at the Sahara Hotel, saw it differently. He saw around the corner to the convention center, to 2 shows, to 80,400 seats each. He said yes when everyone else had said no. The convention center booking was an act of imagination that required logistics to match. Stan had to negotiate with the convention center, divide the available tickets among the Strip hotels so that every property had skin in the game and would promote the show, price the seats at levels that were unprecedented for Las Vegas at the time, $12, $50, and $25, and sell 2 complete shows on the same day to a city that had never hosted anything of comparable scale. He sold out both shows, 8,408 seats each, more than 16,000 total. Every hotel on the Strip that had passed on the Beatles now wanted to talk about how they had been involved. The Sahara sat at the northern end of the Strip, far enough from the center that it had to work harder than the others. In that effort, it found its identity. And in that identity, Stan Irwin found his calling. That instinct for timing, for rooms, for what an audience would become, was the signature of his life. Stan Irwin was born in Manhattan in 1920. His father, a Russian immigrant, had come to America and found his footing in the food business, practical, hard-working, grounded. His mother came from Polish and German roots, and her brothers moved in a different world entirely. Theaters, agents, managers, vaudeville. Between those 2 worlds, hospitality and performance, Stan found his future. The Russian immigrant and the Polish-German mother, it is a quintessentially American origin story. A family defined by the distance it had traveled, the work it was willing to do, and the worlds it was beginning to enter. Stan absorbed both sides. He had his father's practicality and his mother's family's flair. In the intersection of those 2 inheritances, a producer was being formed without anyone calling it that. From the time he was a small boy, Stan attended vaudeville houses with his grandmother. He watched the comics work the crowd, learned the language of the stage, and felt something click. School plays followed, boys' camp shows, operettas, comedy routines. He fell under the spell of Danny Kaye, studied his timing, wrote material in that style. Then came the harder lesson. Timing can be borrowed, but a voice has to be earned. Stan would spend the better part of a decade earning his. The vaudeville houses of 1920s and 1930s New York were universities for a certain kind of education. You learned how a room breathed. You learned what made a crowd go quiet and what made them go loud. You learned that timing was not just a skill. It was a relationship between performer and audience that had to be built in real time every night from scratch. Before there were casino showrooms, there were mountain resorts, amateur hours, bus trays, and borrowed routines. Stan worked as a busboy in the Catskills by day and performed staff shows by night. He learned burlesque sketches from Joe E. Ross, appeared in Joey Adams' amateur hours, and attended New York University. He wrote material with a man who went by Mad Jack and who later became known as Rodney Dangerfield. He traded lines with Joey Bishop and played the small clubs in Long Island and the Bronx. Comedy was a fraternity before it was an industry. Stan paid his dues at every level. The amateur hour circuit was its own economy. Joey Adams ran shows at which young comics competed for prize money that ranged from $10 to $25. Stan won enough of these to sustain himself while he continued developing his act. But the real value was not the money. It was the reps. You learned by failing in front of an audience that was not particularly sympathetic. You learned what worked by discovering, in the most direct way possible, what did not. The Catskills were their own kind of school. The mountain resorts, Grossingers, the Concord Browns, ran on entertainment the way the casinos would later run on gaming. You needed to fill the dining room. You needed to fill the shows. You needed to keep the guests happy enough to come back next summer. For a young comic with ambition and no connections, the mountains were where you traded theory for practice. Stan cleared tables by day and learned how the laughs worked by night. Just as radio seemed possible, history changed the act. Stan was drafted. The performer became a cadet. At one point, he lost enough weight to qualify, passed his physicals, and entered the Army Air Corps. The comic learned checklists, discipline, loyalty, and the practical mathematics of staying alive. The Army Air Corps took the comic and gave him an aircraft, a checklist, and the kind of responsibility that could not be improvised. You either knew the procedure or you did not. You either flew the plane correctly or you did not come back. For a young man who had spent his entire adult life in the improvisational world of nightclub comedy, the discipline was bracing. It was also formative. Stan came out of the war with something that the Catskills and the Long Island clubs could not have taught him, the understanding that preparation was not the enemy of performance. It was the foundation of it. In December 1943, Stan graduated and married Ruth in uniform. The timing was military. The commitment was personal. It would remain one of the constants in a life built around motion. Then came the P-40. Stan was flying maneuvers, an Immelman turn, a climb, and then a stall. The aircraft went into an inverted spin. For a moment that stretched into something much longer, he did not know if he was going to pull out. He did. He landed. And the next morning, according to the story he told for the rest of his life, there was a gray streak in his hair that had not been there the night before. Some men leave the war with medals. Stan left with a story. And a reminder that survival is its own kind of discipline. The gray streak in the hair. Stan wore it for the rest of his life, not as a wound, but as a credential, evidence that he had been tested at altitude and come back down. In show business, that kind of story never loses its value. The audience you earn by surviving something real is different from the audience you earn by being funny. Stan had both kinds of credibility now. After the war, Stan chased the work west, Philadelphia, Chicago, Los Angeles. He played clubs, worked the rooms, kept performing. Then, at Billy Gray's bandbox in Los Angeles, he crossed paths with a young musician named Henry Mancini, who gave him a suggestion that sounded almost like a geography question: Las Vegas. Henry Mancini was not yet the Henry Mancini. He was a young musician working the same circuit Stan was working, trying to find his sound in the post-war entertainment economy. But he had heard about Las Vegas. He had heard about the money and the rooms and the opportunity. And when he told Stan, Stan listened. That is one of the skills that separated Stan Irwin from 100 other performers who passed through Los Angeles in the post-war years. He was genuinely curious. He was always listening for the next room. In 1949, Las Vegas was not yet Las Vegas. It was a 2-lane road, telephone poles, dust, lawns you could cross on foot, and hotels still learning what they might become. Stan came for 11 days, booked by Herb McDonald to perform at Club Bingo. Within days, Milton Prell, the hotel's owner, gave him control of the Bonanza Room. Stan arrived as a performer. He left as something else. He had started to see rooms not just as places to work, but as problems to solve. By the time Stan arrived in Las Vegas, he had been in show business for the better part of 15 years. He had worked rooms of every size and type. He had performed for audiences that were enthusiastic and audiences that were hostile and audiences that were simply present because there was nothing else to do. He had been paid well and paid badly and not paid at all. He had written material, stolen material, collaborated on material, and discovered that the best material came from the specific truth of who you actually were, rather than who you were trying to be. All of that experience was about to become useful in a way he had not anticipated. Club Bingo sat on the land that would eventually become part of the larger Strip landscape. Las Vegas in 1949 was a place that serious entertainment people still regarded with mild suspicion. It was a gambling town. It was a desert town. It was a town where mail sometimes went to Las Vegas, New Mexico by mistake, but Stan saw something else. He saw a room, and a room was all he needed to start. In 1952, Milton Prell invited Stan back for a new hotel, the Sahara. Prell made him vice president over entertainment, publicity, promotion, and public relations. Stan understood immediately that the Sahara could not operate like Club Bingo. A hotel of this scale needed more than acts. It needed identity. The Sahara opened in 1952. It had a Moroccan theme, exotic, theatrical, immediately different from the ranch and gambling aesthetic that had defined Las Vegas's earliest hotels. Milton Prell wanted the Sahara to be something you remembered. Stan Irwin understood that you remember a place because of how it made you feel, and how it made you feel was almost entirely a function of who was on the stage and how they were presented. To open the Sahara, Stan wanted Ray Bolger, but Bolger's agent had a problem. Bolger did not do nightclubs. Stan's response was not argument, it was reframing. He called Bolger's wife and described the room not as a nightclub, but as a dinner restaurant with a proper stage, theatrical lighting, professional sound, and the dignity the performer deserved. The room had not changed, the name had. Ray Bolger opened the Sahara. The reframing of the Bolger booking tells you everything about how Stan Irwin thought. Most people in that situation would have argued harder, offered more money, or found a different act. Stan found a different name for the same room. The room did not change. The contract did not change. The performer did not change. But the meaning changed, and meaning was what the deal was really about. This instinct for language, for framing, for the difference between what something was and what it could be called, would serve him for the rest of his career. The Sands had Jack and Trotter, who carried Copa credibility and had access to the top nightclub names. Stan could not beat Trotter at his own game, so he changed the game. If he could not get the obvious stars, he would build new ones for Las Vegas. Opera, dance, film, older entertainment forms that had never played the desert. Abbott and Costello, Eleanor Powell, Jose Greco, Nelson Eddy, Jeanette MacDonald. He was not booking acts. He was creating a new roster for a new city. The Sahara's competition with the Sands was not just about talent. It was about identity. The Sands had the Rat Pack, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawson, Joey Bishop, and with them came an aura of cool that was impossible to replicate. Stan did not try to replicate it. He built a different kind of identity for the Sahara, more theatrical, more varied, more willing to take risks on performers who did not fit the standard nightclub mold. The Sahara became the hotel where you might see something you had never seen before. The Sands was the hotel where you saw the best of what you already loved. Both strategies worked. They worked because they were genuine expressions of the men who ran the entertainment. The secret word was traffic, not glamour, not ego. Traffic. A full lounge meant a full casino. A full casino meant life. The Sahara Lounge became legendary. Don Rickles, Louis Prima, Keely Smith, the Mary Kay Trio, the characters. Shows ran until dawn. From midnight to 6, the Sahara was alive. The lounge was not an afterthought. In the economy of a Las Vegas hotel, the lounge was the engine. The showroom was the marquee, the thing that got people to the property. But the lounge was what kept them there. If the show ended at 11 and the lounge was dark, the guests went to bed. If the lounge was alive, really alive, with the kind of performers who fed off late-night energy and got better as the night got later, the guests stayed, and while they stayed, they gambled. Stan understood this mathematics completely. He had been on the other side of it, performing in rooms where you could feel the casino pulling people away from the stage. Stan created multi-year contracts for performers, giving them financial security and allowing the hotel to control costs. Because he had been a performer himself, He knew the terror behind the tuxedo. He built security into the deal. If you worked well for him, you could plan your life. Don Rickles was a revelation in the Sahara Lounge. His willingness, his eagerness to insult the audience was something nobody had quite seen in a Las Vegas room before. He made the audience the show. Louis Prima and Keely Smith brought something different, an energy that was simultaneously domestic and explosive, a marriage played out on stage 8 times a week. The Mary Kay Trio brought musical sophistication and comedic timing in equal measure. Each act was chosen not just for quality, but for fit, for what the room needed at that hour, for what the casino traffic required. Then Louis Prima walked into his office with a complaint. He did not belong in a lounge. The chairs, the tables, the feel of the room, it was beneath him. Stan looked at the room. The chairs had wheels. He noted that the audience could turn toward the stage. He looked at Prima and told him, "It is not a lounge. It is the Casbah Theater." Problem solved. Contract signed. Some producers solve problems with money. Stan solved this one with language. The Casbah Theater story is the most compressed version of what made Stan Irwin exceptional. In 60 seconds, he converted a grievance into a contract. He did it not by giving Prima more money, not by changing the room's physical layout, not by making any promise he could not keep, but by changing a name. The chairs had wheels. The audience faced the stage. Therefore, theater. It was the kind of solution that looks obvious in retrospect and is nearly invisible in the moment. Las Vegas sold glamour, but not everyone was allowed through the same door. Stan's memories carry the contradiction plainly. Black artists could fill a showroom and still be denied a room in the hotel where they performed. Dinah Washington, Billie Holiday, Lena Horne, Pearl Bailey. These were performers who commanded stages and commanded audiences, and were made to enter through service entrances, sleep off property, and live by rules that had nothing to do with talent. It was performers like Lena Horne and Pearl Bailey who forced the city to change. Their refusal to accept the terms of the old arrangement, quiet, insistent, dignified, helped break the color line that had defined Las Vegas entertainment for its first decade. Stan's recollections of this period do not minimize what happened. The glamour was real. The injustice was also real. Both things are part of the story. The racial history of Las Vegas entertainment is not a footnote. It is one of the central facts. The city that sold fantasy offered a very different reality to the black performers who made its showrooms electric. The irony was not lost on anyone who was paying attention. The same audience that gave Lena Horne a standing ovation on Saturday night would not have been permitted to sit next to her at a Las Vegas lunch counter on Sunday morning. What changed? Slowly, imperfectly, under pressure that came primarily from the performers themselves, was not the city's conscience so much as its economic calculation. When Pearl Bailey and Lena Horne made it clear that their presence came with conditions, the hotels that wanted them had to decide what mattered more, the old rules or the revenue. The revenue won. Before Las Vegas became a brand, it had to be sold. Stan helped develop the Publicity Directors Association, a coalition of hotel publicists who understood that while hotels competed for guests once they arrived, the common cause was getting people to Las Vegas in the first place. They helped launch a TWA flight from San Francisco to Las Vegas. They distributed silver dollars at the airport. They treated the city itself as the show. The Publicity Directors Association represented a philosophy that was unusual then and would be almost unimaginable today, competitors cooperating. The Sands and the Sahara and the Desert Inn were not friends. They wanted each other's guests and each other's talent and each other's margin, but they shared a common interest in the existence of Las Vegas as a destination. If nobody came to the city, nobody came to any of the hotels. So the publicity men worked together on the city's reputation while competing ferociously for individual bookings. Stan understood the difference between the two kinds of competition, the kind that helped everyone and the kind that helped only yourself. Then Stan ran for the Nevada State Assembly with a slogan borrowed from a nightclub tradition, "Stan Your Man." He campaigned on television, dropped flyers from a plane, and knocked on doors. He won. In office, he helped push through the 1955 sales tax, tying it to aid to dependent children, broadening Nevada's revenue base beyond gaming. The headline in the newspaper read, "Irwin Railroad's Sales Tax." He wore it as a compliment. The campaign for state assembly used every tool Stan had developed in show business. He knew how to sell a room. He knew how to create an event. He knew how to make people feel that something important was happening and that they had a role in it. Dropping flyers from a plane over Las Vegas was not a stunt. It was a demonstration of the same theatrical instinct that had served him in every booking he had ever made. Know your audience, give them something they will remember, and make sure they know your name. The 1955 sales tax was not the most glamorous achievement of Stan Irwin's public life, but it may have been the most consequential. Nevada had built its economy almost entirely on gaming revenue. Stan and his colleagues in the assembly understood that a state dependent on a single revenue stream was a state that was one economic shock away from crisis. The sales tax tied government revenue to the broader consumer economy, and tying it to aid to dependent children made the politics of the thing harder to oppose. It was showmanship applied to governance. Find the frame that makes the argument irresistible. For Stan, the end of the old Las Vegas came not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a meeting. Under new corporate ownership at the Sahara, the Del Webb era, a hotel executive asked the chef for an opinion about the entertainment. Stan resigned. The symbolism was precise. Show business authority had been displaced by corporate process. He did not tell the chef how much salt to use, and he would not let the kitchen book the show. The corporate era did not arrive as a villain. It arrived as efficiency. The new owners of the Sahara and the other hotels understood balance sheets. They understood occupancy rates and food and beverage margins and the cost per square foot of entertainment. What they did not understand, what they could not be taught by any quarterly report, was the invisible chemistry of a room. The difference between an act that fills the casino and an act that empties it. The difference between a lounge that makes people want to stay and one that makes them want to leave. That knowledge lived in the bodies and instincts of men like Stan Irwin, and when those men left, the knowledge left with them. Howard Hughes had come to the Desert Inn as a guest. When the hotel asked when he would leave, he responded by buying the property. Then he bought more. Then the accountants arrived, the bean counters, the executives who thought in quarterly reports rather than rooms and performers, and the invisible chemistry between an audience and a stage. In Stan's telling, that is when the fun went out of Las Vegas. Not all at once. Gradually. The way the best shows always end. Before the audience is quite ready. When Howard Hughes bought the Desert Inn, he was not investing in entertainment. He was investing in privacy. He wanted a floor of a hotel in the desert where he could seal himself off from the world. That was fine as far as it went. But Hughes kept buying. And as he bought, others followed the logic. Las Vegas was no longer a collection of independent showmen competing on the basis of who could put on the better show. It was becoming a portfolio of properties managed for aggregate return. The showman's eye, the eye that could see a room and know immediately what it needed, was being replaced by the accountant's spreadsheet. Old Las Vegas had a costume. Men dressed, women dressed. The night had rhythm. Big bands played from 2 to 5 in the morning. Breakfast and dinner changed places. The rounders, the gamblers, the nighthawks, the people who made the town run after midnight kept the city awake. Stan remembers furs in the air-conditioned casinos, dice on green felt, the feeling of a room that knew what it was for. There was a social contract in old Las Vegas that extended far beyond the showroom. The hotels had rules, not written down, not legally enforceable, but understood by everyone who worked in them. You dressed. You behaved. You treated the staff with a certain civility. In return, the city treated you with a certain discretion. What happened in Las Vegas stayed in Las Vegas not because of a marketing slogan, but because the people who ran the town understood that discretion was a service they provided and a service that kept the guests coming back. Stan managed stars the way a good producer manages everything, by understanding what the performer actually needed, which was rarely what they said they needed. Las Vegas could amplify a performer. It could also expose one. Fame got you booked. Fit kept you alive. There were performers whose television celebrity was enormous and whose Las Vegas audiences sat in puzzled silence. The room demanded something specific, a kind of directness, a command of the audience's attention that worked without the mediation of a camera. Ethel Merman had it. Noel Coward did not in Las Vegas. Ted Knight, beloved by millions as Ted Baxter, could not find the live room version of what he did on television. The distance between a beloved character and a working performer is sometimes the distance between a stage and a screen. Mae West arrived at the Sahara surrounded by musclemen and wrapped in mystique. Milton Prell turned maroon watching the act, but West understood her audience completely. She did not need 5 minutes to get a laugh. Sometimes one entrance was enough. Mae West's act was unlike anything else on the Sahara stage. She was not performing youth. She was performing the idea of herself, the wit, the innuendo, the absolute command of a room that came from decades of knowing exactly how every line would land. Milton Prell's discomfort was its own kind of testimony to her power. She made audiences feel things that made hotel executives nervous. Stan understood that nervous was not the same as bad. Betty Hutton required an extra air conditioner. Stan understood that the complaint was rarely the complaint. A performer asking for something unusual is often a performer asking to be taken seriously. He used positive statements, theatrical problem-solving, and genuine attention to manage what others called temperamental. He called it perfectionism. Betty Hutton was electric on stage, one of the most kinetically gifted performers Stan ever worked with. But she was also demanding in ways that tested lesser producers. The extra air conditioner, the specific microphone placement, the lighting adjustment that had to happen 30 minutes before the show. Stan did not see these as unreasonable. He saw them as the external symptoms of an internal need, the need to feel that the room cared about getting it right. When a producer demonstrated that care, actually listened, actually solved the problem, the performer relaxed, and a relaxed performer gave a better show. The logic was entirely practical. Johnny Carson came to the Sahara as a television star. Stan trimmed his act, solved production problems, and became his concert manager and eventually his producer manager. He raised Carson's Las Vegas value steadily until the number reached $100,000 per show. Carson trusted timing. Stan trusted rooms. Together they turned television fame into Las Vegas money. The Carson relationship was one of the longest and most consequential of Stan's career. He first worked with Carson when Carson was doing stand-up between his television commitments, a gifted comedian who had not yet found his largest audience. Stan saw that Carson's appeal was fundamentally about intelligence and timing, and that both of those qualities played extraordinarily well in a Las Vegas room. He trimmed Carson's act, tightened the pacing, and helped Carson understand that the live audience and the television audience required different things. The work paid off. By the time Carson became the undisputed king of late-night television, his Las Vegas value had grown to a number that would have seemed implausible a decade earlier. Stan also helped transform Hello, Dolly with Pearl Bailey into something larger than a revival. He saw that a show could be reborn by changing who carried it. With Pearl Bailey in the lead, the production became proof that format and identity could transform each other. Years earlier, a Broadway producer had told Stan that Broadway was not interested in Las Vegas. Stan walked out of that meeting with a prediction. One day, Broadway and Las Vegas would meet, and the meeting would happen in Las Vegas. He lived to see it come true in the residencies, the production shows, the Celine Dion's, and the Cirque du Soleil's that now define the Strip. The Broadway-Las Vegas connection that Stan predicted is now so thoroughly realized that it is difficult to remember a time when it seemed unlikely. Celine Dion's residency at Caesar's Palace changed the economics of Las Vegas entertainment permanently. Monitor the monitor. Too many performers, gifted, celebrated, beloved by audiences, had trusted the wrong accountant, signed without reading, handed their finances to someone whose loyalty was to the commission rather than the client. Stan had seen it happen enough times to make it a warning he gave freely. Some ideas are too early. some are too strange, some are both. Stan proposed a rock orchestra built around Buddy Rich before horn-driven bands became a phenomenon. Rich refused to release him from a prior arrangement. Stan proposed licensing Beatles haircuts and laminated lockets. Brian Epstein said no. He tells these stories not as wounds, but as punchlines with footnotes. A man who has genuinely created things does not need to mourn the ones that got away. He just notes them, smiles, and moves on. A comic learned timing, a pilot learned discipline, a producer learned rooms, and Las Vegas learned scale. Las Vegas likes to remember itself in neon. Stan Irwin remembered it in rooms. Who could fill them, who could hold them, who deserved a better one, and who knew how to keep people there until dawn. You can be elderly without being old. The show changes, the room changes, the audience changes, but the work remains. Know the room, honor the performer, keep your dignity, and never stop building.